The smell of fresh paint and sawdust always felt like home to me. Most people walk into a paint store and only notice the endless rows of color samples, neatly lined cans, and the occasional whirring of a mixing machine. But to me, it was more than just a store. It was a living, breathing place where I could finally blend my love for people with the knowledge of trades that had been passed down through my family. I'm 25, autistic, and carrying my share of battle scars from life. PTSD that sometimes makes me stumble, sometimes makes me freeze, but also makes me hyper-aware of how words and actions affect others. I don't shy away from talking about it. I'd rather be upfront than try to hide who I am. And here in this store, that honesty wasn't just tolerated, it was respected. When I first joined nearly a year ago, I quickly learned that our location wasn't just any paint store. We were what the company called a training store. New hires, management trainees, assistant managers, all of them passed through our doors at some point. Some stayed for weeks, some for months, but all of them carried pieces of our store's culture out into the wider district. It meant our team wasn't just employees. We were mentors, guides, and in a way, guardians of the company's future. That responsibility suited me perfectly. I thrived in teaching moments, explaining to a nervous trainee how to use the tinting machines, or helping a confused customer find the exact shade that would turn a house into a home. It wasn't always easy, sometimes exhausting, often messy, but it gave me purpose. My boss, Tommy, was a big part of why I loved coming to work. Late 30s, kind eyes, and a firm but fair attitude. He wasn't the kind of manager who barked orders from behind a desk. He worked shoulder to shoulder with us, sweating through the same rush hours, answering the same difficult calls, and always making sure we felt supported. You don't grow a team by standing above them, he once told me. You grow it by standing with them. That stuck with me. Then there were my coworkers, Ben, dependable and quick with a sarcastic joke, and Raphael, who had the patience of a saint and a laugh that could fill the entire stockroom. Even the trainees who cycled in and out became part of a weird extended family. We covered for each other, celebrated each other, and when one of us had a rough day, the others made sure nobody went home carrying that weight alone. But of course, every story needs a villain. Ours came in the form of Bob. Bob was in his late 60s and had been in contracting longer than most of us had been alive. He ran his own company, his name plastered proudly on trucks and invoices, but the pride stopped there. The man was bitter, misogynistic, ableist, condescending. He checked every box on the list of people you'd rather never meet. He wasn't just difficult like some customers, he was downright abusive. I'd heard the stories before I ever met him. Trainees warned me. Even Tommy gave me a stern instruction early on. If you see Bob's number pop up, or if he walks in, you grab me or one of the specialists. Don't take that call. Don't take that order. He's poison, and I don't want you in the line of fire. At first, I thought maybe Tommy was exaggerating. Surely no customer could be that bad, right? Wrong. The first time I saw Bob walk into the store, I felt the atmosphere change. It was like a cold wind had blown through the door. He spoke over people, barked demands, insulted younger employees, and treated anyone under 40 like they were worthless. His reputation wasn't just confined to our store either. Other stores knew him. Other sales reps dreaded dealing with him. But for reasons beyond me, he still kept crawling back, spreading his venom. Yet for all the warnings and all the precautions, I managed to avoid him for months. I focused on the positive, helping regulars, laughing with coworkers, diving deeper into the trade knowledge my father had once passed down to me. I even started building real confidence in my ability to not just do the job, but to thrive in it. It was almost easy to forget that a man like Bob existed. Almost. Because life, in its twisted sense of humor, doesn't let you dodge certain bullets forever. The day started out like any other. The store was busy, but nothing out of the ordinary. The morning rush of contractors had come and gone, leaving behind the hum of the tinting machines and the smell of freshly mixed gallons. Ben was juggling a walk-in customer with a complicated order. Raphael was buried in paperwork, trying to make sense of a delayed shipment. And me? I was holding the fort, answering calls, prepping cans, double-checking orders. Then the phone rang. It wasn't unusual, of course. The phone was always ringing. But when I glanced at the caller ID, my stomach dropped. It was Bob. Normally, this would have been the moment where I'd quietly hand the receiver to Tommy, or one of the specialists, and walk away. But Tommy wasn't here. He was out sick, along with another employee. Half the team was missing due to a training event. It was just me, Ben, and Raphael. And both of them were already drowning in work. For a split second, I considered letting the call go to voicemail. But the phone kept ringing, persistent, demanding. And deep down, I knew what Tommy had said. Don't take that call. I also knew something else. I was tired. Tired of walking on eggshells around a man who had no business being treated with kid gloves. Tired of letting fear dictate my choices. Tired of the idea that one abusive customer had the power to control us. So, against every instinct screaming at me to hang up, I took a deep breath, picked up the receiver, and said the words that would set everything in motion. Thank you for calling Paint Store in City. This is Zulva. How can I help you today? I didn't know it then, but I was about to walk straight into the storm. The line crackled with static, as if the universe itself was warning me that I'd just made a mistake. Bob speaking. The voice on the other end barked, raspy and sharp. This is Bob with company name. I need another gallon of the same paint I picked up a few days ago. His tone wasn't a request. It was a demand. I immediately pulled up the ordering system, fingers flying across the keyboard as my brain scrambled to recall what order he was talking about. His account was large, full of previous purchases, and the signal on our phones was awful. I had to strain to catch every word, piecing them together like fragments of a broken puzzle. I repeated back for confirmation. All right, Bob, just to make sure I've got this right. You're looking for a continuation of the same paint you ordered a few days ago, 1 gallon, correct? That's all I said. Nothing insulting. Nothing rude. Just clarity. And then it happened. The sound that came from the receiver wasn't just a raised voice. It was a roar. A hateful, spitting rage that poured through the line like acid. Are you stupid? Bob exploded. Didn't I just say that? What the hell's wrong with you people over there? You're all incompetent. Every damn time I have to spell things out for you idiots. Can't you do your jobs right? I froze. My heart jumped into my throat. Words are funny things. To some, they're just sounds. But to me, someone who's fought through trauma, someone who carries invisible scars, words can feel like bullets. Each insult lodged deep, vibrating inside me, tearing open wounds I'd worked hard to heal. I tried to stay professional. I apologize, sir. I just wanted to confirm so we don't. But he cut me off louder this time. Don't sir me, you worthless brat. You think you know better than me? You don't know the first thing about this business. I've been at this longer than you've been alive. And you sound like a damn robot. Do you have a brain in there or what? The insults blurred together after that. My hands started to shake. He mocked my voice, my pace, even the way I tried to breathe between sentences. The speakerphone on our system was terrible, so I could barely hear him. Yet somehow every word that did make it through stabbed deep. Ben glanced at me from across the counter, confusion flashing across his face. He must have seen the color drain from mine because he mouthed, Bob. I nodded silently. His jaw clenched, but he was still knee-deep with another customer and couldn't jump in. I kept my tone calm, though inside, I was unraveling. I'll make sure your order is ready soon. He snapped back with one final hiss of contempt. Yeah, you better. About time someone at that dump does their job right. And then click. The line went dead. I stared at the receiver for a moment. The dial tone buzzing in my ear like a swarm of angry bees. My chest was tight, my stomach knotted. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. The worst part? A small voice in my head whispered, maybe he's right. Maybe you messed up. Maybe you are incompetent. That's the cruel trick trauma plays. It takes someone else's cruelty and tries to tattoo it on your own skin. I set the phone down slowly, fighting the sting behind my eyes. Then I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I walked over to Ben, who was finally finishing with his customer. I need to step into the stockroom, I muttered. My voice cracked slightly. Bob. Yeah. I need a minute. Ben's expression softened instantly. He nodded without hesitation. Go. I got this. The stockroom was quiet, the smell of lumber and cardboard filling the air. I leaned against a shelf, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe. Out. In. Out. But the echoes of Bob's voice wouldn't leave me. Worthless. Incompetent. Idiot. I pulled out my phone and texted Tommy, fingers trembling as I typed. Hey, just a heads up, Bob verbally abused me over the phone. I'm in the stockroom calming down. I hit send and sank onto a stack of unopened boxes. My whole body felt heavy, like gravity had doubled. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Tommy was calling. Even through his sick, congested voice, I could hear the worry. Hey man, you okay? What happened? I told him everything. The order, my confirmation, the explosion that followed. I repeated as many details as I could remember, though honestly most of it had blurred into one long wave of cruelty. Tommy was silent for a moment. Then his voice hardened. Listen, you did nothing wrong. Nothing. That man's been a problem for years, and I'm done letting him treat my team this way. You take whatever time you need to calm down. I'll handle this. I'll talk to his rep. Are you sure? I asked softly. Absolutely. You don't deserve that kind of abuse. None of you do. We hung up, and I sat there in the dim light of the stockroom, feeling a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I was shaken. Bob's words still burned in my chest. But on the other hand, I felt a flicker of something else. Hope. Because for the first time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, Bob wasn't untouchable. The stockroom felt like a cocoon, a place where I could press pause on the chaos of the outside world. But even after hanging up with Tommy, Bob's voice still rattled in my head. It's strange. Abuse doesn't always fade when the sound stops. It lingers, crawls under your skin, makes itself at home. I tried distracting myself by stacking paint cans and straightening supplies, but my hands shook too much. So instead I paced up and down the aisle between shelves, sneakers squeaking against the concrete floor. 15 minutes passed before the store went quiet enough for me to rejoin Ben and Raphael. They were huddled near one of the tinting machines, laughing about some old job story. The laughter grounded me. It reminded me that not everyone was cruel, that in fact most people weren't. When they saw me, both their expressions shifted. Ben leaned on the counter, crossing his arms. You good, man? I shrugged. Working on it. Raphael clapped a hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm. Forget him. Bob's just noise. You're solid, brother. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. Tommy's name flashed across the screen. I stepped a few feet away and answered. His voice sounded tired but charged with energy, like someone who was running on sheer determination. All right, listen up. I just got off the phone with Bob's sales rep. My heart raced. And Tommy paused, almost as if savoring the words before delivering them. Bob's banned. Effective immediately. He's not allowed in our store again. I blinked, not sure I heard him right. Wait, what? You heard me. He's banned. I told his rep exactly what happened, and apparently, this wasn't the first time. The rep's sick of cleaning up Bob's messes, so he agreed. No more special treatment. No more discounts. And if he tries to step foot in here again, we've got the green light to tell him to leave. I couldn't stop the grin that spread across my face. For months, Bob had walked in like he owned the place, treating us like dirt because he thought he could. And now, he was out. Just like that. But Tommy wasn't done. Oh, and get this, he continued. The rep didn't just ban him. He jacked up Bob's prices. Contractors like him live off those reduced rates. Take that away, and suddenly his golden goose is cooked. This is gonna hurt him. Bad. For a moment, I was speechless. Then I laughed, a shaky, cathartic laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep. Tommy, you're a legend. Damn right I am, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Nobody disrespects my team and walks away untouched. When I hung up, I turned back to Ben and Raphael, practically buzzing. You guys aren't gonna believe this, I said. And I told them everything, Bob's ban, the price hike, the fact that he'd finally been put in his place. Ben's eyebrows shot up. No way. That's wow. I didn't think they'd actually do it. Raphael let out a loud laugh. Man's been terrorizing stores for years. About time karma paid a visit. The three of us stood there, grinning like kids who just pulled off the perfect prank. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. For once, the scales had tipped in our favor. The store stayed quiet for the rest of the evening. A few straggling customers came in, but nothing dramatic. Still, beneath the surface, there was a hum of electricity, a shared feeling between the three of us. Bob's reign of terror was finally cracking. That night, lying in bed with my cat curled up beside me, I replayed the day in my head. The phone call, the insults, the panic in the stockroom. And then, Tommy's voice calm and steady delivering justice. It wasn't over, not yet. But the first domino had fallen. The next morning, I walked into the store and was immediately met with something unexpected. Jen, our assistant manager, was standing near the counter with Patty, one of the trainees. Both looked at me with concern etched across their faces. "You okay?" Jen asked softly. "We heard what happened yesterday." I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. A little rattled, but I'll be fine." Patty frowned. "I don't know how you stayed on the phone with him. I would have lost it." I gave a half smile. "Trust me, it wasn't easy." Just then Tommy walked in. He still looked pale from being sick, but his presence filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. He walked straight over to me, fist outstretched. I bumped it with my own, and he gave me a proud nod. "How you holding up?" "Better," I admitted. "Good. Because you did nothing wrong," he said firmly. "Bob's the one who crossed the line. And guess what? His rep tore into him last night. Gave him an ass-chewing he won't forget." My eyebrows shot up. "Seriously?" "Oh yeah. And that's not all." Tommy leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was sharing a delicious secret. "One of his clients chewed him out too. Apparently his work's been slipping. You know those storms we had last week? His paint jobs couldn't handle it. The finish cracked and peeled. His client wasn't happy. And now people are talking." The image of Bob's furious face flashed in my mind. For years he'd thrived off fear and intimidation. But now, the cracks in his empire were showing, literally. It was poetic. For the first time since that awful phone call, I felt my chest loosen. The weight that had pressed down on me had shifted. Bob wasn't untouchable. He wasn't invincible. He was just a sad, angry old man whose power was finally slipping away. And we had front row seats to watch it happen. By the time I walked into the store the next day, word had already spread. The air felt lighter, the energy brighter. It wasn't just me, everyone could feel it. The bully who had haunted our store for years was finally facing consequences, and people were savoring every detail. Jen greeted me with her usual brisk energy, but this time there was an extra spark in her eyes. "So," she said, lowering her voice, "I hear Bob's not welcome here anymore." I nodded. "Yeah. Tommy called me last night. Said the rep cut him off." Her grin widened. "Good. That man's been a nightmare since before I started here. About time someone pulled the plug." Patty, the trainee, chimed in from behind the counter. "I don't even know him that well, but I've heard enough stories. Honestly, I'm glad I don't have to." Before I could respond, Tommy walked in. Even though he was still sick, he had that unshakable calm he always carried, like a captain steering a ship through rough seas. He looked at me first. "You holding up?" "Better," I said honestly. "It helps knowing he can't come back." Tommy nodded. "Good. Because it doesn't stop there." He leaned against the counter, addressing all of us now. "I talked more with his rep last night. Turns out, Bob's been pissing people off left and right. Contractors, clients, even his own suppliers. The reps had it. Raised his prices through the roof. No discounts, no accommodations. And guess what? Other stores know now too. Nobody's going to give him special treatment anymore." I blinked. "Wait, you mean?" "That's right," Tommy said, a sly smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "He's blacklisted. If he tries to sweet-talk his way into discounts at our sister store or anywhere else in the district, they'll shut him down. Word spreads fast in this business." The image that hit me was almost comical. Bob, stomping into another store, barking demands, only to be met with polite smiles and full-price invoices. For a man who lived off undercutting competition with discounted supplies, it was a death sentence. And then Tommy added the cherry on top. Oh, and one of his big clients tore into him yesterday. Remember those storms we had? His paint jobs failed. Cracked and peeled like old wallpaper. The client sent him pictures and told him flat out they won't be hiring him again. The room went silent for a moment, the weight of those words sinking in. For contractors, reputation is everything. One bad job can stain your name for months. But if word spread that Bob's work was failing, that was the beginning of the end. Raphael let out a low whistle. Damn. Karma's not just knocking, it's moving in. Ben smirked. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. We all laughed, but underneath the humor was a sense of justice. For years, Bob had gotten away with treating people like garbage. He thrived on intimidation, weaponizing his age and experience against anyone younger, weaker, or less willing to fight back. But now, the very system he'd relied on, the discounts, the clients, the suppliers, was turning against him. The dominoes were falling. And I got to watch. Over the next week, little snippets of gossip trickled in. A sister store called to ask if we'd really banned him. A delivery driver told us he'd overheard Bob yelling at someone on the phone, cursing about betrayal, and price gouging. Even some of his old clients came by our store, asking if we could recommend other contractors, because they weren't going back to him. Each story felt like a tiny victory, not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever endured his abuse. But here's the funny thing. As Bob's world crumbled, mine started to feel steadier. I noticed the change in myself. When customers called, I didn't flinch as much. When the phone rang, I didn't scan the caller ID with dread. The anxiety was still there. PTSD doesn't vanish overnight, but I could feel a shift. Like maybe, just maybe, I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. One afternoon, Mort, the trainee who'd been with us the longest, was wrapping up his last shift before moving to his new store. We all gathered by the tinting machines, clapping him on the back, trading jokes, and wishing him luck. You'll crush it, I told him, pulling him into a bro hug. He grinned. Only because I learned from the best. That hit me harder than I expected. For months, I'd questioned myself, doubted my worth, let people like Bob crawl into my head. But in that moment, hearing Mort's words, I realized something important. I mattered. My work, my patience, my willingness to teach, it mattered. And while Bob was out there burning bridges and watching his empire collapse, I was surrounded by people who respected me, who valued me, who had my back. That was the real difference. Bob had built his career on fear and arrogance. I was building mine on kindness, respect, and community. One foundation was crumbling. The other was only getting stronger. And as the week closed, with my cat curled up beside me at home, I couldn't help but smile. Revenge hadn't come in the form of some grand explosion or dramatic showdown. It had come quietly, steadily, like a tide washing away the sandcastle of a bitter old man who thought he was untouchable. The dominoes had fallen. And the best part? I hadn't had to push a single one. The weeks that followed felt almost surreal, like the universe had decided to hand me a gift wrapped in justice and sealed with poetic irony. Every time I walked into the store, the tension that once haunted me had been replaced with something warmer, brighter. An atmosphere of camaraderie and quiet pride. My co-workers, who had once been just colleagues, had become something closer to a family. They didn't just stand beside me through the storm. They had fought it with me, shielding me from its worst winds and cheering when the lightning struck exactly where it was supposed to, on Bob's empire of arrogance. Word traveled fast in our industry, and every whisper about Bob's downfall was like a healing balm for my soul. His old clients had abandoned him, disgusted by his corner-cutting and sloppy workmanship. Other stores had turned their backs, refusing to sell to him. Even his own rep had jacked up his prices and quietly celebrated the loss of one of the most toxic customers in the region. Bob, the man who thought his words were daggers and his temper a crown, had been reduced to nothing but ash scattered on the winds of his own cruelty. At first, I tried to be discreet about how good it felt. I didn't want to seem petty or vindictive. But the truth? I savored every story, every rumor, every chuckle from Raphael when he came back from a contractor lunch with yet another tale of Bob screwing up, or losing another account. Guess who had 3 houses peel within a week? Raphael would say, slapping the counter with his big hands. Bob. Customers are suing him. Guess who can't even get primer at wholesale prices anymore? Ben would add, with that mischievous grin of his. Bob. He's paying shelf price. I didn't laugh loudly, but I smiled. And that smile ran deep, reaching places in me that had been bruised and quiet for too long. One morning, as I was stocking the brushes aisle, Mort walked in. His uniform shirt was crisp, new, and embroidered with the logo of his permanent store. He had finished his training and was moving on. You're gonna miss me, he teased, nudging my shoulder. I already do, I said, and it was true. Mort had been like a steady light in the chaos, calm, observant, always willing to jump in when things got rough. We had a little send-off for him in the back room, complete with store-brand cupcakes and a card signed by everyone. I wrote, "Thanks for having my back when I needed it most. You're one of the good ones." He read it, smiled, and patted my arm without saying anything. He didn't need to. Some bonds are beyond words. Tommy, my boss, gathered us after the little celebration. His voice carried the same steady authority as always, but there was something softer beneath it, too. "I want you all to remember something," he said, leaning against the counter, arms folded. "Respect isn't optional in this store. It's the foundation of everything we do. You can know paint inside out, you can stack shelves faster than anyone, but if you don't treat people right, you don't belong here." Bob thought he could get away with disrespect because he had money and contracts. Now, he's got nothing. That's the power of a community that stands together. We all nodded, but for me, the words carried extra weight. Respect wasn't just about workplace culture. It was about survival. People like me, people carrying invisible battles like PTSD, didn't need special treatment. We just needed humanity. And I had found it here, in this little store that had my back when I thought I was alone. Later that evening, I sat at home in my small apartment. The quiet hum of the city outside my window blended with the soft purring of my cat, who was curled against my chest. I stroked his fur absent-mindedly, thinking about everything that had happened. A few months ago, one cruel phone call had cracked open wounds I thought I had stitched shut. But instead of breaking me, it had led to something else. Proof that I wasn't as fragile as I feared, and that there were people in this world willing to stand up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. I thought of Bob, somewhere out there, scrambling to salvage his reputation, watching everything he had built collapse because he couldn't keep his temper in check. A part of me almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered his voice, spitting venom into the phone, and I knew. He had written his own ending long before I ever became part of his story. I leaned back, eyes closing, and let the peace settle over me. Revenge had never been part of my nature. I wasn't the kind of person who plotted or schemed. But sometimes life writes revenge for you. Not through malice, but through balance. Bob had tipped the scales too far, and all it took was one final shove for gravity to do its work. For the first time in years, I felt steady, whole, maybe even proud. The cat purred louder and I smiled. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was as simple as sitting in your living room, safe and calm, knowing the world had righted itself just a little. And in that moment, I knew I had found something better than revenge. I had found respect, family, and peace. And that was sweeter than anything Bob could ever take away.